Hi, Joe Nohavicka here from the Astoria offices of Pardalis and Nohavicka, and welcome to Cup of Joe. The reason that we do these live audios is because I think people get the wrong idea of what our publications are like when we write Cup of Joe. I think they believe they're going to have to read legal cases and statutes and stuff, and it'll be very complex. I promise you it's not. It's all real life stuff. Anybody can understand it. The law is for everybody, so I encourage you to read them. Anyway, let's talk about today's case. We talk about being on the subway and what can happen to people on the subway. And the first thing that comes to mind is you talk about muggings, you talk about robberies, you talk about jumping the turnstiles. But what happened in this case, it can happen to anybody, and you could be perfectly innocent. There's a great novel written by Kafka, and it's called The Trial. And it's a story about this guy, Joseph K. And he wakes up, and there are two policemen at his door. He has no idea why they're there, and he's arrested, and he has no idea what for. And the entire book is about that. The entire story is about this Joseph K. who is arrested and has to go to court. He has no idea what he did, and he never even finds out what the charges are. That book was written in 1914. The case we're going to talk about today happened in July of 2020 on the A train coming down from 174th Street down to 34th Street. We have this guy, George Matthias, and he is with his supervisor. And they took the train together every day, and on this one day, he and his supervisor were having a heated discussion, not arguing, just a heated discussion about a sports game. You know what? Could have been football, could have been baseball, could have been soccer. I have no idea. All of a sudden, a woman starts screaming at them, and they both look up. And the woman is pointing at George and saying, "Don't do that, don't do that." And George looks at her and says, "What are you talking about?" The woman then calls over a police officer and said that the guy was being lewd. The police officer arrests George and he takes him away and he's processed. And that's what this case is all about. And this can happen to anybody. You could be on the train and all of a sudden somebody's pointing at you saying like, "Why did you do that? Why did you touch me? Why did you say that to me?" What are you going to do in that situation if the police come and they arrest you? So let's talk about this case and how it proceeded. So George is arraigned, he pleads not guilty, and the case goes to trial. His attorney believes that it's such an easy case, he doesn't need a jury, he's going to let the judge decide. And the judge is a great judge, Phyllis Chu. But what happened is such an unusual thing, such a strange thing. George came in and he actually testified, and that's a very rare thing for a defendant to testify, because you can get in trouble, even if you didn't do anything wrong, just by having your words twisted around. But George had no prior contact with the criminal justice system. He had not an arrest, nothing, zero, never even got a parking ticket. And here he finds himself, kind of like Joseph K., being hauled into court because some lady said he did something. The woman testifies that she saw George masturbating in public on the A train. Now, she brings no witnesses in. We have George's supervisor who was there the entire time, who also testified that they were just sitting there talking. They take the train all the time, and he had never seen George do anything or even make any kind of gesture towards this woman at all. The case turns out like this. The judge says that she doesn't believe the supervisor, and she doesn't believe George, and she believes the woman. And now this guy is found guilty by the judge of public lewdness. And this has to follow him around his entire life. So this is in criminal court. You have a couple of paths to go to get it all cleaned up. You go to what's called, from criminal court, you go to what's called the appellate term. And you have 3 judges that review everything that happened. Now you're thinking like, okay, the only proof that this woman had was her word against the word of 2 other people. Okay? She had no pictures, she had no witnesses, and supposedly this was on a full train. She has nothing. So you figure, okay, you know, the appellate court is going to hear this and they're going to say, you know what, there's no way that they met their burden, that the prosecutors met their burden with evidence that was beyond a reasonable doubt showing the guilt of poor George. You know what? If you believe that that's what would have happened, you would have been wrong. Two of the judges agreed and said, you know what? This was entirely within the discretion of Judge Chu. Judge Chu was in the position where she could weigh the credibility of each of the witnesses, and there were only three, each of the witnesses that testified. So therefore, we're not going to disturb it. What a nightmare. Thankfully, one of the judges disagreed and said, you know what? This case has a lot of problems here. Was there really enough evidence to put this guy into jail, to give him a criminal record of public lewdness? You know, we have a lot of problems with the fact that there are no photos, there are no witnesses, and we have a crowded train, and we have witnesses on the other side that corroborate completely exactly what George said. And we have George who has no prior criminal record, no complaints against him. He has a job, never had any complaints on his job, and he has a witness. How much more could you ask for as a defense attorney? You know, how could you tell your client, oh my God, this is a big risk here, you know? But you know what? It is always a big risk when you go to court. You never know exactly how it's going to turn out. You could take your years of experience, your years of going to court, and you can never predict with certainty exactly how everything is going to turn out. George took the chance and he went all the way. I think a lot of people would have done the same thing in that position. The judge who disagreed with the other members of the panel had a lot of problems and went so far as to write in a dissenting opinion, which is an opinion that goes against what the holding of the other judges were. Now, what the majority of the judges hold, that is the law of the case, okay? But if a judge disagrees, they can write their disagreement in what's called a dissent. And the purpose of that is to give other courts guidance, to say, hey, you know what? Look at these other things if you're deciding. Look at these other problems with the case that the majority, that my other brother judges did not even consider. There was a serious risk, the dissenting judge said, that there was a grave, grave risk of an innocent person going to jail. And when an appellate court notices that there's a grave risk of an innocent person going to jail, they can, just on that fact alone, reverse the decision of the court that tried the case. And they could vacate that judgment of conviction. And that's what the judge believed should have happened, okay? But it did not. Now, thankfully, as I told you, we were in the criminal court. The next court that they can go to appeal is called the appellate term. And then if you lose at the appellate term, you can go to the appellate division. And that's why the judge wrote the dissent. Now, this case has not gone to the appellate division yet. It just happened in July of this year, so maybe by next year, within the next 9 months, we'll know if there's been an appeal on that issue. But as it stands right now, based on the word of one person with no other proof, a man has been convicted of a terrible, terrible crime. So you have to be careful, and that's the lesson of this. You have to be aware of these things, especially if you're in New York, and with things opening up and more people are starting to take the subway. You have to protect yourself. You know, what could George have really done in this situation? You know, maybe he could have had somebody that was in the area, gotten their names or something, and this way he could have contacted them, said, hey, look what happened to me. You know, I don't know how people would react, but if I saw something like that, I hope that I would have helped George, and I hope that you would have too. I hope you enjoyed this installment of Cup of Joe, and I hope that this is the type of stuff you'd like to read about. And I don't want you to be afraid of reading these cases. They are for everybody, not just for lawyers and judges or law students. It's for everyone. So come to www.pnlawyers.com and check out our blog. Check out Cup of Joe. We have all the stories there. And I hope I see you next time. Thank you.